Carolyn Sawyer is no stranger to the sector. I think I've known you for most of your 20 years in the sector, Carolyn, both as a funder and a grant giver across the piece. During that period, I've known you as someone who I believe inspires confidence in the third sector, the voluntary sector, and in the work that we do, and I think you help us to reflect that confidence. I think for me, I've seen you being an enabler, and I've experienced this personally. You've been an encourager, and I think a key quality of being a funder, you're a pragmatist, and I think that comes through time and time again. So Carolyn, sorry, I've been speaking to Caroline earlier on. It's Carolyn, sorry. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of the 116 funded organisations on the fund. I'm not giving the name, on the fund. Can I just say a thank you to you and also to your team who have helped to support the sector throughout this 7-year journey and the bit beyond the 7 years. I mean, I have to say, in my time working with colleagues in Corra, I have found the advisors, the team behind the scenes, the leadership team at Corra been really supportive of the sector. They've been knowledgeable, they've been helpful, they've been challenging at times, challenging to help get the best out of that fund for people in our services. And I think they, like you, have also been pragmatic in how they have approached their work with us. And I think that was more seen throughout the last few years of the pandemic, and we all had to adapt. And I think COVID adapted really well on behalf of the sector in helping us to get through these tough times. So thank you for that to all of the team at Corra. And it now gives me great pleasure in inviting you, Carolyn, to come and address the conference today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian, for those kind words, not just about myself, but about the team, obviously, as well. And I would just note for everyone in the room that Ian and I both started straight out of school in this sector. That was 20 years. Well, folks, as I kind of look out on this room at so many people, so many folk that I know well and admire and respect and know are so deeply knowledgeable about this field, and who I always look forward to listening to, not least our wonderful chair for the day, Ian himself. I have to say I'm slightly regretting saying yes to the Corra team when they asked me to do this. Why did I end up with this last slot? But one overriding reason that I did want to do this is to be able to stand here and say thank you from all of us at Corra to you. What a privilege it's been to be on this 7-year journey with you. And I mean, that's a message from me. It's certainly a message from the programme team, all of whom you know very well, and some of whom have been with you on that whole 7-year journey. But it's also a message from folk back at the ranch in Corra who perhaps you haven't met as much, but who have been very much part of this journey. The folk who've tweeted and retweeted whenever you've shared a story or a great report with us, the folk who answered the phone when you called the general number, the folk who amended your details on our Salesforce database, that's always the most joyous job, and the folk who processed those all-important financial payments. So this fund looms, I think, just about as large in our lives as it does in yours. This work's important to us, it's a priority, and it's a focus. The fund, or should I tell you now that in the office we really call it the programme with the really long name? Not the programme team, obviously. They have got all those initials down pat. They've got them scribbled on their notebooks and tattooed on their arms, maybe not the tattoos. I've just realised a picture of myself up there, how very disturbing. Thank you. From all of us in Corra's team, I do want to say we've been very proud for these 7 years to support you and to champion your work and in our small back office way to be part of the difference that you all make for children, young people, families, learners and communities right across Scotland. And I want to say thank you for everything that we've learned from you and your colleagues past and present along the way. And why has it been important to us? What's so special about this fund? I think we're especially proud of the way that the support and engagement has evolved over time. Developing, I think, a real bank of resources that really enhance the capacity of this sector. And the key to that activity, and why I'm really proud of it and why it stands out for me, is that the issues have been identified by the organisations here in the room. And we've worked together on all those capacity and support events, often with organisations themselves taking the lead. So it's been that peer-to-peer learning, which I think has really made the difference and it been at the heart of the approach. And that's been an approach that's changed what Corra does in other programmes, and I think has also affected how some other funders think about capacity building, support and development work. Secondly, this fund is important to us because we know how unique and special core funding is. And I know it's a bit sensitive to talk about that right now, but I feel I can't not. There's an important global point about the value of long-term core or unrestricted funding. And that point is very well made by the sector. Funders and grant managers like ourselves hear that point and will continue to speak up and champion it. And Corra's had a privileged seat alongside many of you across this journey, and many organisations in that time have faced significant challenges, not just financial ones. And so I really want to recognise the resilience of people in this sector and people in this room and across your organisations who've faced some trying times, and in those trying times have just continued to keep delivering for the people that you're working alongside and who you're supporting. So thirdly, for me, this fund's important because it's given us all this unique period of time together. It's not really been a straightforward journey, but it has been a long-lasting one. And today's an example, I think, of that kind of looking back and looking forward with new ideas and new knowledge that sort of collective work on a fund like this can create. There is a horizon beyond the fund, and in that horizon there are strong organisations there because of the work we've done together. And there's better practice on a whole host of areas around children, young people, learning and community work because of the work that we've done together. And there are long-standing relationships and partnerships between organisations that I think are an enduring legacy of this fund. I wanted to share those insights about the fund, and in doing so, I really want to pay tribute to the body of the Kirk here in front of me, because that learning about what's special and important about this fund, it really comes from all the reports, the stories, the meetings that you've shared with us. And pay tribute also to the Corra Foundation staff team who've spent a lot of time reading and analysing and thinking about what you've shared with us so that it could be amplified and shared beyond your organisation into this pretty special network of organisations, and then even beyond that into policymakers and even some politicians in government. Gary and I are doing a wee two-step here. Did you anticipate that? This is great. We're so in tune in Corra. I mentioned a horizon there. So looking ahead, what do we see? If we get this right, all of us in Scotland, I think that growing up in Scotland and living in Scotland should mean a lifelong journey of care and support and learning, of being unsure and then finding the answer, of being certain and then hearing another view, of thinking that you can't and then learning that you can, of saying what you think, knowing that you are heard and seeing the difference that it makes, of feeling like you might be able to change the world, and of finding folk near and far around you who might come together alongside you to create a bigger change, a lifelong journey of going places and coming home, or of staying put but dreaming of elsewhere, a lifelong journey of taking part, of connecting and of love. So that's what I see when I look ahead, or maybe it's what I want to see. So I want to just spend a few minutes now on thinking, how are we doing on that shared journey in Scotland? I'll give Gary a wee note. So the bigger picture for me is quite a challenging context right now, and we've touched on it already in our conference today. I think we must acknowledge that it's an exceptionally tough time right now, from the pandemic to the cost of living, from a health crisis to an economic crisis. The most common thing we hear from communities right now is that resources are low, of money and of energy, of personal energy, and that things are not back to normal after the pandemic, and the crisis has evolved. And I think the cost of living crisis has undoubtedly deepened existing poverty and driven new people into poverty. More people need the help now that charities and voluntary organisations are offering, but those organisations themselves are finding it harder to meet those needs because of the stress that they're under and because of the way that inflation is eroding the value of donations and the value of your reserves. So community groups, social enterprises and charities are struggling to recruit. Staff and volunteers are running on empty. I think capacity is a bit at a breaking point. And funders like Corra have seen a really strong uplift in requests for funding for food, for fuel, for clothing, where funders have been distributing grants around hardship, basic household hardship. The demand has been overwhelming and exceptionally high and quite sobering. So we are seeing some smaller organisations beginning to fold. Recruitment in the sector, as we've talked about today, is a really considerable challenge, and I know that that has a knock-on impact on people's capacity to deliver. I think coming together in the pandemic showed us, really in many ways what can be done and how ways of support can be remade, how trust in one another and trust between institutions can really make a difference and be rebuilt. But communities are telling us now that great wave of trust that happened and that great wave of shared kind of action that characterised relationships over the last 2.5 years, in some places that's snapped back a bit, I think, and the previous top-down approach is coming into play again. So that power shift is at risk of being reversed, and that innovation is at risk of stalling. And power is perhaps the lens that at Corra we are increasingly really using to consider our own role and to think about how we work with others and what levers we might pull to bring about this kind of wider change and really positive change that leads to everyone enjoying a fulfilling life. And that sets us on quite a bold and progressive agenda. When I look at the context in Scotland right now and I think about where's the exciting work being done around power, it is inspiring to see the depth of work around the human rights agenda, I think, in Scotland. I think that's incredibly powerful. It's got clear potential, it's got political will, and really for me it's the expertise that's already there in the third sector around human rights that gives me real confidence. For people in this room, the future incorporation of rights, especially UNCRC, of course, is really is clearly the huge prize. But I think we also will have to have an eye on some of the sort of practical steps around that as well. The ones that if we miss them, people in Scotland won't be able to name and claim their rights. Those kind of implementation challenges, the capacity in public bodies, for example, to really kind of deliver on human rights. And in my mind today really are those furthest from their rights right now. So I'm thinking there about children, about people with disabilities, Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, refugees and asylum seekers. It seems vital to me that we need to add this to our lens right now, not just the idea that a rights-based approach is a great way to bring about change, because it is, but that without care, those who need that change most are at risk of being left out. So finally, and what I realise is a not too cheery section of this talk that's about the current context. I promise I've got some positive things to say at some point, but I do wonder if, like me, you might think that we need to set our sights on some wider challenges as well, on the bigger picture, as we battle with that day to day, can we find space and capacity to think about the wider challenges, the challenges that seem far away but are actually, if we're honest, beginning to impact on us right now, the ones that might not be on anyone's risk register at the moment and might not be what you think the priorities for your organisation need to be right now. Because if I'm honest, I think we'll collectively look back in 5 years' time and regret not working more now on remaking our economic system. An economic system that isn't particularly finely tuned to deliver for people and planet, that at best is missing chances to do more of the heavy lifting in terms of tackling poverty and inequality. And at worst is actually driving those issues. And I think in 3 years' time, we might collectively regret not doing more work now on information and misinformation, on the traction of ideas and how the media really works now, on nurturing the muscle that is democracy and democratic participation, and on considering the role that AI is beginning to play in all of our lives, and how ethics must be deeply and powerfully embedded in it. And I wonder if we already collectively begin to regret not starting 5 years ago to work more on the climate and nature emergencies, and to recognise that these are driving energy system problems right now. They're driving economic volatility, and they're undermining global solidarity and progression. So we might face a unique set of near-term challenges right now: energy, cost of living, not really through COVID. We've certainly not rebuilt our public services from that shock. But I think we also face a unique set of wider issues, I suppose, to inequality, economy, democracy, climate. I think about all of that and I think, let's get positive and take action. So there are three things that I think people in this room and some friends outside it might band together to achieve. The first is a long-term lens. A long-term lens for this sector and a long-term lens for children, young people, families and communities. Of course, there's urgent need right now. There's a moral obligation, I think, to act. But I also feel an obligation to act on the issues that are underlying that, the causes, not just the effects. And to do that, we need to take a longer-term lens. I want to share one reflection that we've had in Corra on the pandemic period, which is about short and long-term thinking. And the reflection is that things we thought couldn't be done got done. In Corra, I think that pandemic period sort of ruined our preference for perfectionism, but in a good way. So we didn't know exactly what was right. We just knew what was right now. And we didn't know the right next moves. We just knew the next step that we needed to take. And the risk of not acting outweighed the risk of acting. And switching back to long-term thinking is quite challenging. Corra Foundation has a 10-year strategy. So within that, we're trying to kind of hold on to and keep the best of that feeling of act now on the big issues, just take the next step. I really do think we need to bring that way of working and thinking to the big problems in Scotland right now, like climate, like poverty, like inequality. Because for me, the risk of not acting outweighs the risk of acting. And also gain confidence from the fact that in Scotland, we've done some pretty bold things before. You know, we've got world-leading housing and homelessness legislation. We've got smoke-free public places. We've got a record on community ownership we can be incredibly proud of. For me, the key is for us to work together across the system on both these kind of short-term and long-term thinking. In the short term, people are experiencing really acute need right now. We must recognise the emergency nature of that. But in the longer term, we need systemic changes to our housing system, our energy markets, our benefits system, and a whole host of other ways in which we do things. And what potential if we could balance our work across this short and long-term thinking, hold each other to account to ensure that someone, somewhere, is looking with that long lens. The second thing I think we might band together to achieve together is an honest conversation about prevention. And early intervention and prevention, it feels like it's just been so tantalisingly close to the answer in Scotland now for so long. I really do feel we need to grasp this moment to have an honest conversation. And that honesty includes that we've probably all got prevention somewhere in our idea of what we're doing as an organisation. So why isn't the major shift happening? What is it? Why are we stuck? So I think we need to be really honest about the fact that a long-term shift to prevention means ultimately there will be fewer crisis services. There'll be fewer people working in those crisis services and less money being spent on them. And I think we need to be really honest about how difficult it is, therefore, to make that shift right now in the face of such urgent and immediate crisis needs. How should we make those incredibly finely balanced decisions to tip, to start to disinvest in crisis? Could we do that collectively? Could we share that accountability? And how can we give cover to those who will need to directly take those decisions and who inevitably won't do so perfectly in every case? Let's be honest, I think the fear in the public sector of getting that wrong is creating a bit of an unsustainable stasis. So finally, can I suggest that my final idea of what I think we could band together to do, and that's to listen and to act on what we hear, to listen to children, young people, families, learners and communities, to create an unstoppable momentum that places people at the centre. And Corra was part of something called the Listening Fund in Scotland, which was supporting third sector organisations working with young people to really think about how they develop, challenge and codify their own listening practice. And as a funder, we did the same. So we went through the same process and challenged ourselves to examine who do we listen to, why and how. The standout learning point for me from the evaluation of that Listening Fund, which is a very good document which I recommend to you, is not just about listening. It's about doing something with what you hear. That's where the trust is built. That's where the magic happens. So I want to share one line from a case study from an organisation actually in this fund that stopped me in my tracks when I read it. And I'll be careful here, as you all are, when you share these personal stories with us. I'm not going to say where this line comes from, taking care to share that with the story with respect. But the line I want to read you is from a young boy being supported at school, and he said this. He said, "I could design a good school. I know how. I know what I want. I know what I want." That made me think completely differently about how we support. It made me think completely differently about school, and it made me think differently about the actions we can all take. So, starting to draw to a close here, and I'm kind of conscious that we are then therefore nearing the point of drawing our conference to an end, and this is the final annual conference in what's been a 7-year programme. And it made me think about our journey, and it made me think about how this sector, the kinds of organisations you work in and that you represent, affects people's lives, how this sector's affected my life. And my earliest memory is from being at nursery. And I can remember being up a tiny wee climbing frame and being too scared to jump down. And then I saw my mum from out the corner of my eye, and I felt safe, and I jumped. And when I look back, I think the person who probably moulded who I am more than anyone else as I was growing up, probably other than my family, was my English teacher, Mrs. Barclay. Now, I know now her name's Jean Barclay, but I could never call her Jean Barclay, Mrs. Barclay to me. And she was the teacher who pressed Charles Dickens books into my hands for the summer holidays, because she knew even then what a wee nerd I was, I guess. And growing up gay in a new town in the west of Scotland, the place that mattered to me was the Key Youth Centre in East Kilbride, or the Dixon Street Centre in Glasgow, for those of us who remember those days, where weirdly Patrick Harvey was my youth worker. So youth workers can end up being ministers, Scottish Government ministers. Youth work can take you anywhere. A safe nursery to play in, an inspiring teacher, somewhere to hang about as a teenager. They all made a big difference to me, and I know they make a big difference to so many people across Scotland. Our stories are all different, but as organisations we've been on this journey together, and I think it's really important to share those stories, to share where we've come from and what we've learned. The next steps might be a wee bit uncertain, but together I know we've listened and we've heard one another, and we've been inspired to action. Action, I hope, to contribute and create that Scotland where people's lifelong journey is full of care and support and learning and taking part and connecting and love. And sometimes I feel that I could try and change the world a wee bit. And in this room, I see quite a lot of folk who might band together with me on that journey. So thank you again from Corra Foundation for your friendship over the 7 years of this programme. And it's my pleasure to hand back to Ian to close out our conference.